And today we're on to season 4, which is the book of Numbers. The worry on the book of Numbers was that it was going to be all about maths, and indeed we are starting with some maths in the form of counting. We're going to do Numbers 1 to 8 today, just because there's a lot of fairly mundane detail in that part, so we're going to get out of the way of just pulling out a few of the interesting points. The numbers in question are God has come to Moses and said he wants a census of the Israelites, which makes some sense. There is, however, a hint in this that the reason he wants this census and the people he wants counted are those men of fighting age. Nothing more said about it in 1 to 8, but it does sound like this is... it's not a great sign, is it, particularly? There are 2 whole pages of this, and if you're reading along in the Bible, you'll be familiar with how teeny tiny the writing is in it. So 2 pages of writing on that counting is... it's a thing to get through, certainly. But basically it's divided into each area of the Israelite community, and then all totals up to 603,550 people, which is wonderfully specific. Albeit that does only include the men of fighting age and excludes all the Levites, who are the priestly tribe, as it was said earlier. Because the Levites are all set aside, presumably not to go to this battle that may or may not be coming, and their job is to look after the tabernacle. The obvious question there is, are there not a lot of Levites? And the answer is yes. There are apparently 22,000 of them who are going to be in charge of looking after a tent. A big tent, with a very elaborate tent, but a tent. We do get a strong hint that we are still continuing the theme from Leviticus and all the rest of it, and that God says anyone who approaches the tent who isn't a Levite will be put to death. I think that does seem to be a change, because I'm pretty sure you couldn't go in the tent before, unless you were a priest, but you could approach it, I thought, because that's where you were supposed to do your sacrifice. So I'm not sure if that represents a change, but either way, not a Levite, don't go near the tent, a lot of trouble. God gets very specific then about how the people are to be divided up, and that is, if you recall, the Israelites are formed from the 12 tribes of Israel, i.e. the 12 sons of Jacob / Israel. All these descendants now are from there, and they're still denoted as being one of these tribes. God is very specific about where each of these collections of fighting age people must sit around the tabernacle, and one to the north, one to the south, and all the rest of it, but obviously 12 of them. God is clearly not slapdash in his instructions. I mean, we've obviously seen plenty of examples of that, but he's very specific about where everyone needs to be, which was, again, when you're thinking about armies and all the rest of it, that's also perhaps not a good sign for what's coming. Or perhaps a good sign for what's coming, in the sense that this is quite difficult to make interesting videos about slightly dull directions to do stuff. So hopefully that means there's some story coming that will make my life easier anyway. There's a lot more of God gives us direction, finishes the sentence with I am the Lord, so you do this, I am the Lord, you do that, I am the Lord. I still don't understand why that is. It's pretty clear who he is, but maybe it's just a formality thing, but there we go. God then provides some very specific instructions for how everything in the tabernacle is to be packed up when it moves. The moving of the tabernacle, we'll come on to that, probably in the next video I think, it seems to be quite almost random, or at least there's no discernible pattern to it. So sometimes they'll be somewhere for a couple of days, sometimes they might be there for a couple of years or a couple of months. But either way, from time to time the tabernacle will be moved. So these 22,000 Levites have that job, and God is very specific about how they go about packing it up and moving it. I mentioned before about there being 22,000 people, just to illustrate some of that. Denoted for specific curtain carrying duties are 2,630 people. It's a very elaborate tent, as I said. I mean, I get it, but there's a lot in it. I get it, but you know, even if one person carries one tent peg or one item within it or one curtain, surely there's not enough for that many people to do. In total, anyway, 8,580 people are in charge of moving the tent. So what the other 14,000-ish are doing, I'm not quite sure. We then veer off into, well, I'd say seemingly random, but probably it's certainly in keeping with what's been going on. God saying what you should do if you suspect your wife of adultery. And that's, you have to take your wife to the priest, presumably not near the tabernacle, because if you're not a Levite, you're going to be put to death. The priest will then get them to drink some cursed water, bearing in mind innocent till proven guilty, but it doesn't seem to be a thing here. You go and you have to drink this cursed water either way. It seems to be just water with some dirt in it, but the idea is that if she's guilty of adultery, then she will miscarry if she falls pregnant again, and if she's innocent, then she won't. It's there are some problems with this, but it's not entirely unusual given what we've covered already, so I'm just going to sort of go, yeah, and we'll move on from that one. We have the introduction of something called a Nazirite, which I'm not clear what that is, but it seems to be some sort of extra holy person who dedicates themselves to God. And there's some very specific directions about what they have to do, but broadly speaking, it's shave their head and give up wine. I don't think I know many people who would agree to these terms, and it's not clear at all why anyone would want to be a Nazirite, so we'll have to keep an eye on that and just see if something becomes clearer in terms of what that is and why anyone might want to do it. We then have the leaders of each of the 12 tribes are told they need to bring a specific set of sacrifices to God, and I don't think that's particularly unusual, but it's the way it's expressed in the Bible. It literally lists all 12 of them and what they bring. So you read tribe number 1 brings this, 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 this and this. Tribe number 2 does it. As far as I can tell, they're all identical. I did cross-reference about 3 of them, and they were definitely identical. And then I slightly lost the will to live a little bit. But then it just summarises it all anyway. So it's a very minor point, but why do we have all the long-winded, dull detail? He did this, he did this, he did this, he did this. And they just summarise it, they all did that, and it was, I believe it said they're all the same, but it certainly wasn't noted that there was any difference, and no one seemed to be killed because it was wrong. So yeah, not much really going on, it seems, but it does seem to be setting the scene for what might be to come, which doesn't sound particularly fun for the Israelites in terms of armies and all the rest of it. Hopefully much more interesting for us. And we will move on and see what develops, and hopefully something a bit more interesting.